in the context of the presentation. So whatever you feel comfortable doing, that's totally fine. So this is us. We're a team of 3 practitioners, and we've got 8 kids between us. So we know not only the theory, but we also know the practical side of things. So we know what it's actually like, you know, trying to get supplements into a child, or, you know, trying to get your child to drink more water, or any of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. And some of the things that we help with include fussy eating, eczema, lots and lots of eczema, allergies, kids who are just sick all the time. So, you know, the recurrent daycare illnesses, sleep issues, and mood issues. So mood issues can be, you know, anxiety, OCD, anything along those lines at all. So that's sort of our little kids, but then we also help your big kids. So obviously, as our children grow into teenagers, they get a whole other set of problems that we now learn how to deal with. So, you know, I've got a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, so I'm well in the throes of this with the hormones, the mood swings, the acne, and then obviously with girls, there's the period issues, which, you know, the sooner you address those sorts of issues with your girls, the better. So that's me. And as I said, I'm a naturopath and a nutritionist, but I'm also a feeding therapist, which means that I'm very specialized in fussy eating and how to address that. Summer is a nutritionist and soon to be a feeding therapist, which will be amazing to have that skill. And then we've got Kelly, who is a nutritionist and a naturopath. So as I said, what we're going to talk about tonight is how to address fussy eating, how to help your child sleep, and what to do about the constipation. And it's very annoying, the little Zoom bar is always in my way. So everything that we talk about is evidence-based, and that's the sort of practitioners that we are. We don't make stuff up or just go along with, you know, the trends that might be on Instagram. We're very much looking at PubMed, finding the evidence that's relevant to the child that we're treating. But we're also very practical because we've got all those kids of our own. So, you know, if it's highly recommended that your child does something, but we know that that's outlandish for a child to do, then we're not going to recommend it. We're going to, wherever you see this little icon, quick tips, that's things that you can actually write down tonight and start to do straight away, and you will see benefits for that issue when you do it. So that's what I really want. I want you to walk away tonight knowing what you need to do going forward to make some changes and how to improve things. And then time for Q&A at the end. All right, so I will start off talking about fussy eating. And I could talk for days about fussy eating. I've been a feeding therapist for about 3 years, and in that time I've seen hundreds of fussy eaters. And these are a few of kind of the categories that can make a child a fussy eater. But honestly, I have never seen 2 kids present with the exact same profile and the exact same problems that are contributing to their fussy eating. Every single child is different. So if you go into a Facebook group for parents, you'll often see people saying, oh, my 3-year-old is a fussy eater. Everybody will pitch in, oh, this is what worked, this worked, this worked, this worked. And that's what might have worked for their child, but there's absolutely no reason to believe that that's going to work for the child who's asked the question. And we really do a lot of testing and a lot of investigations into fussy eating to see which of these categories is presenting the biggest problem. And if you went to see a speech therapist or an occupational therapist, obviously they have a different lens, which is great, but they're not looking at these things. So if your child has been to see a speech therapist for fussy eating and they haven't made the gains that you were hoping that they would, maybe it's because they've got a gut problem. And the speech therapist, obviously that's not in their scope of practice, the same way that swallowing issues are not in my scope of practice. So the big one that I like to look at is nutrient deficiencies. And there's a few nutrients that will be nutrient deficiencies that will be caused by fussy eating. But not only that, they also make your child a fussy eater. So you end up in this vicious cycle of your child not eating well, getting deficient in nutrient, which prevents them from eating well. And the really classic one for that is zinc. And I always say zinc makes you think. So if your child is deficient in zinc, they'll be a fussy eater, but they'll probably also have a lot of issues around emotional regulation, sensory processing, all those sorts of things as well. And zinc is found in animal products. Yes, it's also found in things like, you know, pumpkin seeds, chickpeas, those sorts of things, but it's not very well absorbed. And they've done lots of studies on countries that are predominantly vegetarian. So their zinc is coming from those sources, and the kids are deficient in zinc. So to have adequate zinc stores, your child needs to eat meat, is basically what it boils down to. And if your child can't chew for some reason, they can't eat real meat. They can eat chicken nuggets or like a rissole, but they can't sit down and eat a steak because they don't have a rotary chew. So they can't break down those muscle fibers. So they can't eat the meat, therefore they get deficient in zinc. And when you're deficient in zinc, you can't taste food very well, you can't smell food very well, everything smells and tastes a bit funny. You can't make the hydrochloric acid in your stomach to break down the food. So when you eat meat, it kind of sits like a rock in your tummy. And then you've got the emotional regulation, so not being able to sit at the dinner table, the sensory issues with the food. So it just snowballs. And it just suppresses your appetite when you're deficient in zinc. And the same with iron. Iron's very similar, but I guess the different thing with iron is that GPs will often test iron, but will never test zinc. So you probably, if your child's a fussy eater and you've been to the GP, you probably already know they're deficient in iron. And maybe you're addressing that, but most likely you're not addressing the zinc. And an iron deficiency will actually suppress your appetite as well as the other things like can make you lethargic, fatigued, all of those sorts of things. And again, it's coming from red meat predominantly. The most absorbed form of iron is coming from red meat. Then the next category is the B vitamins, which again, if your child's existing on, you know, pasta or rice or just a really bland diet, they're probably not getting very many B vitamins. And when you're deficient in B vitamins, you get constipated, which we'll talk about in a minute. You get reflux, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you can also suffer from low muscle tone. So some of the kids that see me, they can't sit upright because their muscle tone is so low. So when they're at the dinner table, they're like that, they're lying over. And of course, you can't eat lying down. It doesn't work very well. So if you're deficient in B vitamins, you're going to have all of those problems, and it's going to make eating really difficult. And protein, if your child's not eating any protein, then again, their muscle tone and their ability to chew is actually going to be impacted, and they're not going to be able to chew the more difficult foods like meat and hard vegetables and things like that. So that's a big one that I always address really from the get-go. And if someone has blood tests, awesome. If they don't, then I'll organize a hair tissue mineral analysis, which is actually really accurate for the zinc. Iron, I do love to see a blood test just to be sure. And B vitamins and protein, B vitamins you would have to do in a blood test. So the next big category, which again, generally won't have been addressed, are gut issues. And I see a child who, she's about 7, so she's been a very restrictive eater forever and been to feeding therapy forever. And she came to see me and we did a gut test and she had Giardia. So she had probably had a sore tummy her whole life. And kids who have sore tummies all the time do not realize that that's not normal. So this little girl, probably every time she ate when she was little, it hurt. And she didn't say, oh, you know, mommy, when I eat, it hurts. Because in her mind, that's just what happens. You eat and you get this uncomfortable feeling. So we worked on the giardia, which was causing the gut pain. And sure enough, she started to expand her diet straight away. And it's a much longer journey for a 7-year-old to expand your diet than it is for a 2 or a 3-year-old, but it can be done. And the next one is constipation, which is great because that's what we're going to be covering in great detail tonight. But again, if your child has a gut full of poo and they're backed up and they're only going to the toilet once a week, they do not want to sit down and eat a nice, nutritious meal, because I wouldn't either. If I had 5 days worth of poo in my tummy, I would not want to sit down and eat meat and 3 veg. I would just want to have something really comforting like chips or something that's just going to make me feel a bit better. So we'll talk about that later on. And then reflux. If your child has reflux, it's the same thing as with the gut pain. They have developed the association that I eat, it hurts. And that they might have had reflux when they were a baby. Maybe they'd even been on Losec as a baby. And somewhere along the way, it was decided that they don't have reflux anymore, so the medication was stopped. But in fact, they may still have reflux. And I'm not saying put them back on medication, because that's really, really damaging to take long term. But there are lots of things that you can do naturally for reflux to reduce it. And then inflammation. Again, kids who have taken laxatives for years and years and years will have higher levels of inflammation when we do stool tests. And that, I guess, uncomfortableness as well will stop them eating. So the next bucket of issues that can be a problem are oral motor issues. So that basically just means how well your child can use their equipment in their mouth to eat food. And, you know, kids who exist on yogurt or smoothies or pouches, they haven't developed strong muscles. Their tongue doesn't know how to sweep food from the middle of their mouth onto their molars. They can't do the rotary chew that's really important for eating meat. They might even have an undiagnosed tongue tie, which is contributing to some of these things. So that will stop them being able to eat family foods. They'll still be on the baby foods. So they won't, you know, these are the kids that whenever they moved on to solids, they were fine with purees, but they just never made that jump at, you know, 9, 10, 11, 12 months onto the family foods, and they're still stuck on the baby foods. And then we've got lifestyle factors. And don't underestimate how important these are. Again, in Facebook groups, when somebody says, I have a fussy eater, what do you recommend? I will always see people write, oh, we could just put out a platter of food for them and let them graze all day long. They'll be fine. That's like the worst thing that you can do, because it wrecks their teeth, terrible for their gut. And it's just, it doesn't help with them eating meals at meal times. They're just always snacking all day long. So implementing a structure of breakfast, lunch, dinner, morning tea, afternoon tea. Basically, your child will be eating every 2.5 to 3 hours. That's the approach that you want to take if you want your child to be hungry and to eat at meal times. Also, eating at a table with a parent, you know, without the TV on, all those kind of old school approaches to dinner time really, really work with your fussy eater. And your child, they might not like it at the start, to be honest, when you take away their device and say that's what they're doing. But they will learn to love this, because this is quality time with their parents. So this is their opportunity in their day to tell you what has happened to them, what the best bit of the day was, what the worst bit of the day was. So it really is quality time, and it's free. So you don't need to take your child to get a manicure or pedicure. Just sit down, have dinner with them every day. So you might have a fussy eater and not be too bothered about it, but probably not, because you're here. So I'm going to assume that you are a bit bothered about it. But in case you're wondering, these are the reasons why you actually do want to address your fussy eating. And the first one is because the range of foods your child eats can actually decrease over time. So your child might start off with 30 foods, and one by one they'll drop them and they'll say, oh no, actually I don't eat noodles anymore, I only eat rice and pasta. And then they're down to like 20 foods, and then they'll say, actually no, I don't eat sourdough bread now, I just eat the white bread. And then they're down to 10 foods, and they can get down to 2 foods. What happens when you're on 2 foods? The next stop is 1 food, the next stop is no foods. And I've seen kids where they are down to 2 foods. So the next thing that I share is going to help stop that ever decreasing circles of food elimination. A lot of people will go to their GP and they'll say, I've got a fussy eater, and they'll be told, oh, they'll grow out of it. Everybody is fussy. Yes, a lot of kids go through a fussy stage, but there's different levels of it. And if you're concerned enough about your child's fussy eating to go to the GP, then I'm going to assume that they're probably quite a fussy eater, and they might not grow out of it. And it is so much easier to address these issues in a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old than in a 10-year-old. And it's pretty much impossible when they're a teenager. The physical issues, why they don't eat, can become behavioral. So your child might have started out being a fussy eater because they were constipated. But then somewhere along the lines, they've developed anxiety about food because mealtimes are so stressful. It's such a big issue and a big drama in their lives that then they've got the avoidance. So, you want to intervene while the issues are still physical before they get to be emotional issues about food. And I think it's such a gift to give your child, is to have a good emotional relationship with food. Because speaking to adults, I know that having a good, healthy relationship with food is actually not that common. Your child's gut health will decline if they're not eating, a wide variety of plant foods every week, which will in turn affect their mental health, which may not become apparent until they're teenagers, but it will happen over time. Now, another thing, if you go to a GP or a pediatrician about fussy eating, they'll weigh your child and decide based on that measurement whether you have a problem or not. And absolutely useless. I see overweight fussy eaters and I say very underweight fussy eaters. Weighing your child tells you nothing about the quality of their diet. And then obviously you want to avoid the nutrient deficiencies, so avoid your child becoming anemic, etc. So this is a quick tip that you can take away and implement tonight. And this is how to prevent food jags. So food jags is where your child will eat the same food over and over and over and over and over and over again, and then they'll stop and they will never look at that food again. So for instance, a child has chicken nuggets every single day. That's protein, so that's okay. But if you give them the chicken nuggets every day, ultimately they will say no more chicken nuggets, and then you'll have lost that food. So you want to avoid food jags. And the way you do that is you only serve the same food once every 48 hours. And if your child has 5 foods, that's not possible. So for instance, with the cucumber, you need to change the presentation every time you serve it, so that even if they're having cucumber at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you need to serve it 6 different ways to get through 48 hours with that one vegetable. And they have to notice the change. So you can't change it just so you notice. They have to notice it, but not freak out about it. And that is so individualized to each child. You might have to start off with cutting thick slices and thin slices. That might be how much you can change the food without a complete meltdown. So whatever the food is that they're eating 3 times a day, start now to change it so it's slightly different every single time, and that will stop you losing that food. So at least you'll hold your ground and you won't go backwards. And the other thing that you can implement straight away from tomorrow night is family style serving. So this is where the food is in bowls in the middle of the table. So you don't plate up your child's dinner. You put the serving bowls in the middle of the table. And Mexican is perfect for this. So you got your rice, your tacos, your meats, your salad, your guacamole, all the different things in the middle of the table. But there has to be something there that your child will eat. So if your child only eats rice, there has to be rice in the table. And that stops the common scenario of you making dinner, your child says no, you give them a banana, they go to bed. Because then they know, I don't eat the dinner, I just wait for my banana. This way, if they only eat bananas, so the banana will be offered with the meal, and it's not kind of the backup later, it's actually just parts of the meal. And then everybody helps themselves. So even a 2-year-old can make a stab at serving themselves. So that gives your child autonomy over what they're putting on their plate, which can be, it stops that food. And if they really can't have that food on their plate, I mashed chickpeas last night. I'm not even sure if anybody mashes chickpeas, but I had chickpeas. I cooked them, and I was like, what am I going to do now? So I mashed them with oil and salt, and they were delicious. And I put them on my son's plate, and he just said, no way. He just slid them off the plate onto the table. So in that situation, I could have given him a side plate. So he just takes the chickpeas off his plate, puts them on the side plate, and he's still interacting with them because he still had to move them, but he doesn't have to eat them. Oops. So now we're going to move on to sleep. Why won't my child sleep? I'm going to hand over to Kelly, who is going to present to us about sleep. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. There's a lot of common similarities with why our kids won't sleep and eat, actually. So you'll see a lot of crossover. And again, later on when we're talking about pooping, which is really nice because there's very similar themes that get repeated. We see lots of different contributing factors when it comes to poor sleep in the clinic. The first one would be not making enough melatonin. So melatonin is our sleep hormone, and to make melatonin, we need to make sure we've got all the adequate amounts of its building blocks. So this includes protein, specifically tryptophan-rich protein, which is chicken and turkey and fish. It's also in some oats, nuts and seeds, and a few other foods. But we also need a number of different vitamins and minerals, including B vitamins, zinc, iron, magnesium, and vitamin C in order to make the melatonin from that protein source from the diet. So there's a lot of important nutrients that we need in order to get adequate melatonin. And there are also genetic variations that can impact how much melatonin we make. And these variations can make some people more susceptible to low melatonin than others. So that can be really important when we're assessing the kids in the clinic. Now, food intolerances and allergies can cause irritation, and that's going to impact your sleep. And research has found that kids with food allergies are more inclined to have poorer sleep quality than those kids without food allergies. So just by virtue of the irritation. But we also see food intolerances and food allergies contributing to things like mouth breathing and sinus congestion and sleep apnea. And they'll all impact sleep quality as well. And we'll touch on all of those a little bit more in subsequent slides. Gut health is another big one. So things like constipation and threadworms and gut inflammation, they can all cause discomfort, and that's going to impact sleep. And the gut also has its own circadian rhythm, which is really interesting. And the gut microbiome and gut microbiome dysbiosis and imbalances have actually been found to impact sleep duration and also result in lots of little repetitive short interruptions in sleep, just triggered by metabolites from the gut microbiome, which is super fascinating. And it's also important to note that actually the gut and sleep relationship is a two-way street. So sleep disorders and sleep disruption are also known to negatively impact the gut microbiome. So we're always looking at gut health in the clinic with fussy eating and with sleep. Night terrors are actually another common one. So these typically occur in kids between around 4 and 12 years of age, and they peak around 5 to 7 years of age. They most commonly occur in the first 1 to 3 hours of sleep, when it's a really deep sleep stage that they occur in. In one of my own sons, his night terrors were actually triggered by a food sensitivity that we discovered by using a food diary. But there can be a number of different reasons: developmental, environmental, psychological, and genetic factors have all been found to be causes of night terrors in kids. So things like having a full bladder when you go to sleep, sleeping in a noisy environment, being overtired, overheated, and things like emotional stress and separation anxiety can all contribute to arousal during that deep sleep time that can trigger night terrors. So there's lots of different things that we look at there in supporting kids' sleep. And I'm going to go into those in a bit more detail in a few slides' time. But first of all, how much sleep do our kids need? Okay, so sleep needs are definitely variable. Some people naturally need a bit more or a bit less sleep than others. But generally speaking, all of our kids need quite a significant amount of quality sleep. As much as 15 hours when they are 1 to 1.5 years old, and dropping off to like 10 to 11 hours of sleep at night for most 5 to 12-year-olds. And the reason kids need so much sleep is first and foremost that it's required for growth and development. But additionally, quality sleep is really, really important for immune function and fighting off illnesses. It's important for a healthy appetite, which goes back to our fussy eating. It's important for cognitive function, really significant in learning and memory and decision making and problem solving. Insufficient sleep and poor quality sleep is associated with poor emotional regulation and mood. And over time, it increases the likelihood of anxiety and other mood disorders. And we know ourselves, when we're overtired and we haven't slept, we feel a bit itchy and scratchy, maybe a bit more short-tempered, possibly a bit less able to cope. And that's no different in kids. So poor sleep commonly impacts their behaviour. Now, really interestingly, consistently inadequate sleep due to things like mouth breathing and obstructed airways due to sleep apnea has such an impact on behaviour that it mimics many symptoms of ADHD, and we do see it result in a misdiagnosis of ADHD in some kids. Resolving the sleep apnea in these kids, the ADHD-like symptoms disappear. And in other kids who maybe do have ADHD, then poor sleep quality and sleep apnea will, of course, exacerbate their ADHD symptoms. So it's really important that we support our kids' sleep needs. And the most important way to start with to do this, and this is stuff that we can start with today, right now, with the quick tips, is sleep hygiene. Now, research has found that improving sleep hygiene can resolve as many as 50% of cases of sleep issues. And I see this with both adults and kids in the clinic. Just implementing some key sleep hygiene changes makes such a big difference. So when we're talking about sleep hygiene, we're talking about things like implementing an evening routine that calms the body and prepares it for sleep. So things like a relaxing bath with some Epsom salts, maybe even some lavender in the bath if your child responds well to that, and some bedtime stories. It's also really important to try and maintain a regular sleep schedule. And ideally, this means going to bed and waking up at the same time each day, give or take 20 minutes, even on weekends and holidays, because this really helps to sort of set and regulate your body clock and enhances the quality of your sleep. It's important to avoid devices and technology in the hours leading up to bedtime and to have no electronics in the bedroom. The use of screens before sleep impacts the melatonin production, and it impacts the time to fall asleep and how often we wake in night. So it's a really important part of sleep hygiene. And of course, we also want to avoid stimulants in the lead up to sleep. Things like caffeine and lots of sugar before bed is probably a no-go. Now, if your child is having trouble falling asleep, the things we want to consider are that use of devices and blue light before bed. Because of the way that blue light negatively impacts our natural melatonin production in the evening, Research shows that repeated use of bright screens over as little as 5 days can delay the body clock being ready for sleep by 1.5 hours. So that means after only 5 days of using screens before bed, your child will be ready for sleep an hour and a half later than if they hadn't been using screens in the lead up to bedtime. And that is huge. That is really significant. Another reason why your child might not be able to fall asleep is to do with the way that tryptophan is used in the body. So tryptophan that we get from our dietary protein intake, it's used in 2 different pathways in the body. One is the serotonin and melatonin pathway, which supports mood and sleep. And the other is the kynurenine pathway, which is activated if there's inflammation. So another reason that your child might struggle falling asleep is if tryptophan is being shunted away from melatonin production to the alternate kynurenine pathway. And in this case, improving melatonin levels and possibly short-term supplementation of melatonin and plant melatonins can be really helpful while we address the root cause of the inflammation and figure out why this is occurring. Bedtime anxiety is another really common reason, particularly in young kids, for having difficulty falling asleep. In this case, we'd want to ensure that we're supporting our anti-anxiety neurotransmitter GABA and making sure that's really well supported nutritionally, and investigating other drivers of anxiety specific for that child in order to support sleep onset. And restless legs is another one that can contribute to difficulties falling asleep. For restless legs, we also want to ensure adequate iron, folate, and magnesium. So there's some nutrients that we can support there to reduce restless legs in kids. But if your child can't stay asleep and frequently wakes in the night, again, we really want to make sure they aren't using screens and devices in the hours before bedtime. So research found that exposure to blue light before bed not only delays being ready for sleep, but also resulted in an average of 7.6 sleep disruptions through the night. Lots of night waking with screens before bed. Bedwetting, of course, will disrupt sleep and lead to night waking. Again, lots of different causes of bedwetting that we see in clinic, and we could do an hour-long presentation on bedwetting alone. It is a huge topic, from simply too much water near to bedtime to things like slower central nervous system development, nutrient deficiencies, food allergies, kidney or bladder infections, and high histamine, which increases the sense of urgency and urine volume. There's so much that we can look at with bedwetting. So we need to investigate and address the root cause of the bedwetting in order to reduce the associated night waking in those kids. Sleep apnea, I mentioned a little bit previously. So the obstruction of the airways associated with sleep apnea impedes sleep quality and oxygenation of the body and can result in frequent night waking. So it's really important to investigate the root cause of the sleep apnea. Often we'll have kids get sent off for a sleep study, and the ENT will do an assessment and come back with a diagnosis of sleep apnea, and that's where it's left. But really want to look at what's driving that sleep apnea. In kids, it's commonly due to enlarged tonsils or even sinus congestion and mouth breathing, which can be due to food allergies and food sensitivities, as well as environmental allergies. And the gut microbiome plays a huge role in immune tolerance. So interestingly, we'll often support the gut and the immune system in order to reduce sleep apnea. Being overweight is another risk factor for sleep apnea, and there can also be structural reasons that might need to be assessed by an ENT. And when you go for that kind of sleep study, an ENT will usually identify if there's some kind of structural issue that's causing that sleep apnea. And blood sugar regulation, dysregulation, it's another one we see a lot contributing to night waking in kids. Again, I could talk about blood sugar dysregulation for a full hour in and of itself as well. But things like simply changing the bedtime snack has resolved night waking in a number of my clients just by eliminating the blood sugar dips during sleep that commonly cause night waking. We've seen it happen time and time again, really, really common. So eating refined carbohydrates like ice cream and sweets and biscuits or even just white bread or fruit juice before bed can cause significant ups and then downs in blood sugar during the night in susceptible kids. So supporting blood sugar regulation just with little tweaks to the diet, and if necessary, some additional supplementation, that can make a huge difference to night waking. And in these types of scenarios, increasing melatonin doesn't help. The melatonin is going to help more with your sleep onset. The night waking, you've really got to look at the different individual causes for each child. And some more quick tips, some foods for sleep. So certain foods are going to promote better sleep by providing the supportive nutrients. So salmon and other seafood is really rich in zinc, which supports melatonin production and sleep onset, as well as sleep quality. But salmon's also really high in vitamin D and omega-3 essential fatty acids. They are all important for serotonin and melatonin regulation. And when there is an essential fatty acid deficiency, we often see symptoms like difficulty settling at night, and waking unrefreshed in the morning is a common one we see there. And the omega-3 in salmon is linked with improved sleep quality and quantity. So that's a great one if you can get your kids eating salmon. Kiwi fruit is high in serotonin, which converts to melatonin, and rich in antioxidants. And the combination of the two significantly improves sleep in some people. One study found that by eating 2 kiwi fruit an hour before bed, the participants found that they fell asleep faster, slept more, and had better quality sleep. So kiwi fruit is a great one to keep in mind, and one that I didn't really know about until Lisa taught me all about kiwi fruit and sleep. So that was a goodie. Eggs are another excellent source of melatonin and an array of other important nutrients, fats and minerals to support sleep. And tart or sour cherries are really rich in melatonin. And like kiwi fruit, they've also got lots of antioxidant effects that are conducive to sleep. Now, when it comes to cherries, tart cherries, most of the research is on the benefits of tart cherry juice, and they talk about having 1 to 2 cups per day. But I also make up little tart cherry juice gelatin gummies, which is a really nice way for some additional sleep support for kids. It is fun, and they usually quite like eating those. So that's good. Now, lastly, with respect to supplements and herbs, it's always really important to get professional guidance, as what we'll use will be very dependent on all the different factors that I've talked about tonight. We've got some lovely, gentle herbal medicines that can help reduce anxiety and support sleep onset or sleep maintenance, depending on the different herb. So chamomile is one of my favourite gentle sleep supports for kids, but we also use things like saffron and ziziphus. And passion flower is particularly helpful for sleep maintenance, and that can be really lovely for kids. Even as a tea, it's a really lovely herb. When needed, we'll commonly use actual nutrient support, so things like magnesium, zinc, and B6, and iron in some cases where testing has confirmed an iron insufficiency. And lastly, there are also some wonderful plant sources of melatonin that are also really beneficial in cases where some short-term additional melatonin support is needed. So we've got lots of different options, both dietary and for additional herbs and supplementation when required.
Thank you, Kelly. That was wonderful, in-depth and very practical. So now we will hand over to Summer to, let's try and unmute you. There we go. Hello, Summer. Summer will take us through the constipation part. So why can't my child poop? Over to you, Summer.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Kelly. So I'm going to finish tonight's presentation with a chat about pooping and specifically constipation. Before I start, though, I thought it would be a good idea to give everyone an idea of what a healthy bowel motion is. And what we're aiming for is a daily stool, at least once per day, that is easy to pass, it's soft and well-formed, kind of resembles a soft, smooth sausage. And even better if it's coming at routine times of the day. So, for example, first thing on waking or after breakfast. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. I do see a lot of kids in clinic with constipation, and there can be a number of different reasons why it's come about, or even other factors that are exacerbating the situation. For example, there may be gut dysbiosis, food sensitivities. Your child may not be eating enough fiber or taking in enough water during the day, or there's insufficient movement. Now, the last 2 points are probably commonly understood reasons for constipation, but nonetheless, really important to go over in each case. We do know that in Australia, 6 out of 10 kids aren't eating enough fibre. So really important to go through a food diary and see where we can make some tweaks there. Fibre is really important because it provides that bulk to the stool. So your digestive tract gets the signal that something's there to move along to down the digestive tract, ready for elimination. And when it comes to water, this helps hydrate the stool so that it's nice and soft and easy to pass, as opposed to hard and dry and painful. And once a child has, for some kids, once they have a painful poo, it just reinforces that, what I want to say, kind of withholding tendencies and making constipation go on longer than it should. With movement, whether it be running around or jumping on a trampoline or playing on playground equipment, all of those twists and turns of the body, again, help support that bowel motility and the healthy peristalsis that shifts the stool down the digestive tract. And we know that physical activity, based on observational research, really reduces that risk of constipation. Now, 2 factors that are very much on our radar when it comes to constipation is gut dysbiosis and food sensitivities. Now, gut dysbiosis has been mentioned a few times tonight. For those who are not familiar with this term, it basically means that there's an imbalance in the number and or type of bacteria that live in our gut. And these bacteria, these beneficial bugs, they do a whole host of wonderful things for us. And one of them includes ensuring that we have a regular bowel motion and that the consistency is soft and easy to pass. There can be a number of reasons why your child may have gut dysbiosis. Some of them include a nasty gastroinfection. Maybe there's been ongoing limited intake of fruit and veggies, so that fibre factor, as well as a history of antibiotic use. And the way that gut dysbiosis is related to constipation can depend on the type of imbalance present. One example is your child may have an overgrowth of bacteria that produce a substance called methane, and excess methane in the gut is associated with interfering with the normal signaling that coordinates healthy peristalsis and that bowel motility to help push the stool along the digestive tract. The next one that we like to consider is food sensitivities. And when it comes to food sensitivities and constipation, it generally looks at dairy, but there can be other or additional food sensitivities such as that to gluten. Now, the way a dairy sensitivity contributes to constipation is similar to that gut dysbiosis picture. It interferes with that normal signaling that creates that healthy peristalsis. But other research has recently found that it can also impact the functioning of the valves that releases the stool into the toilet from that last holding area called the rectum. So these are a couple of different reasons why a child might not be able to poop. There are other factors involved, and through a thorough case history and intake in a session with us, we'll really be able to pinpoint where the imbalances may be. Moving on, what defines constipation? So for a child to be diagnosed with constipation, they need to fulfill at least 2 of the following criteria, which have been ongoing for at least a month in infants and 2 months in older kids. The first one is 2 or fewer stools per week. Then we have a history of withholding, and this may look like tiptoeing around the room or clenching their bum cheeks together, or even just sitting there with their legs out straight and stiff. Then we've got a history of painful and hard stools. There's also a history, there can also be a history of large diameter stools, large enough to clog up the toilet. And then there can also be the presence of a large fecal mass in the rectum. And I've even had a couple of cases whereby the child has been suffering from ongoing urinary incontinence. And it's only when a GP suggests that there may be some fecal loading going on that in an X-ray shows that they're actually suffering from constipation. Then in toilet-trained kids, there's this additional criteria whereby there's at least 1 episode of soiling per week. So why does pooping matter? Well, if you've ever been constipated, I'm sure you can relate to the discomfort and the irritability that comes alongside it. With chronic constipation in a child, it's also been associated with some not so great health effects. There can be slowed growth, there can be fussy eating, which Lisa has touched on earlier. We can have fissures and fistulas, which add to that whole painful experience, exacerbating and worsening the constipation. There can be impaction, and if serious enough, can really lead to some serious consequences of bowel inflammation and even perforation. And chronic constipation is also associated with an increase in development, both development and exacerbation of eczema and asthma. So what are my quick tips for you tonight that you can take away with you if you've got a constipated kid, or even you might want to try for yourself? I really like to use food as medicine, and some great, well-researched foods that can help support that peristalsis and that bowel motility, as well as helping with stool consistency, so we have a nice, soft and easy to pass stool. Some of these include dragon fruit, ground flax seeds, green banana flour, and kiwi fruit. A really great way I get my kids to incorporate some of these foods is in kind of like an acai bowl, where you puree some fruit and add in lots of goodies. So I get mums to puree up some dragon fruit alongside some other great beneficial fruits for constipation, such as raspberries, blackberries, and blueberries, and then add in the ground flax seeds to make a kind of something they can eat with a spoon, or if they want, they can make it a little bit more liquidier to have it as a smoothie. Now, dragon fruit is great. It helps support, stimulate that bowel motility, but it's also a perfect fiber to add that bulk to that stool, as well as allow the stool to retain its hydration, so it's soft and easy to pass. So that ticks quite a few boxes for constipation. Ground flax seeds, when mixed with water, become a gel-like substance. It's termed mucilaginous, and that helps retain moisture for the stool. Green banana flour is a type of resistant starch, And a resistant starch is a starch that is not digested in the upper digestive tract by us, but preferentially moves down to the lower end where all our lovely beneficial bugs live. So they feed on this resistant starch. They grow in number and activity, and with a lovely variety of beneficial bugs down there, they're able to do what they do best. And one of them is to help with healthy bowel motions. Now with kiwi fruit, similar to the dragon fruit in that it is a really great fibre to help retain water in that stool. And it's actually been shown that kiwi fruit can swell in volume by 3 times its size. So again, contributing to that much needed bulk for your digestive tract to register that something needs to move down and be eliminated. We also have quite a number of natural remedies in our toolbox. So once we take that thorough, once we investigate what's going on for the child and where they've come from, we may get some clues as to what else may be added to their treatment plan. And we also want to provide some relief from that ongoing constipation as soon as possible. So alongside our food strategies, we like to employ the use of certain herbs such as slippery elm, elderflower, and dandelion. Slippery elm is similar to our ground flax seeds in that it becomes a gel-like substance, adding making stools soft and easy to pass. Elderflower is also a mild laxative, and dandelion can be used as a tea for kids, and it's a great, it has a bitter property, and it's able to support digestion and liver function, which are also really important areas to look at in supporting healthy bowel motions. The next one we have on here is probiotics. And probiotics are very strain specific. So in terms of addressing constipation and helping with that healthy bowel motility, we love to use the probiotic Lactobacillus reuteri DSM 17938 to be really specific. And alongside the probiotics, it's really important to make sure that we are nourishing those beneficial gut bugs all the time. We've got our lovely foods we've mentioned earlier, but we also have the ability to use some really targeted prebiotic fibers in supplemental form. And some of my real favorites are something called PHTG and lactulose. So what do we not recommend? Well, a constipated kid who goes to the GP is more than likely going to be prescribed one of these laxatives, Osmolax and Movicol. Why are we not fans of them? Well, they don't get to the root cause of the constipation. They can provide that relief and enable the child to pass a soft stool daily. But I've seen it time and time again where children have come to me being on Osmolax and Movicol for months or even years. And as soon as they stop taking it for a day or two, the constipation returns. So there's clear evidence that it's not going to get to the root cause of the child's constipation. In addition to that, these laxatives have some really negative impacts on your child's gut health. They have the potential to wipe out gut bacteria. And when we have reduced beneficial bugs in our gut, we're going to have a reduced production of the substances they produce called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFA for short. And basically, these short-chain fatty acids do a whole host of beneficial things for us, not only in the digestive system, but systemically. They're related to reducing inflammation and supporting immunity as well. So, yeah, long-term use of Movicol is going to really play a part in balancing that gut dysbiosis if it wasn't even there to begin with. and driving that constipation. And finally, we know our natural methods work just as well or even better because they are getting to the root cause of the constipation, and they are going to support your child's gut health and long-term health overall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Summer. I'm sure you all agree that Summer and Kelly just did a wonderful job at explaining everything to do with sleeping and pooping. So to start off with, I'll just go through the questions that have been typed. So the first one is, my 3.5-year-old only goes once or twice per week. When I asked the GP, they said it's normal. I know it isn't. What can I do to increase her frequency? To rephrase, where shall I start? By definition, she doesn't fall into the constipation criteria. Well, I think the criteria said less than 2 per week. So 1 to 2 per week, that does meet the criteria of constipation, I would say. But also, you know, I think just think about your own situation and imagine that you only went to the toilet every Saturday and what you would feel like by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every week. I can't even imagine going 2 days without doing a poo. So it's incredible what negative symptoms your child will have as a result of the constipation. And probably one of the most dramatic ones that I had recently was a mother, like a client of mine, messaged me in quite a panic because her son had developed a stutter very suddenly. He'd had one like 3 years ago, but he developed a very sudden onset stutter. So she really was keen to go and see like the pediatrician like immediately that week. And by the time we had our appointment, which was 2 or 3 days later, I was like, so what's happening? How's the stutter? And she goes, he did a big poo. And an hour later, the stutter just went away again. So back to your, yes, aggression. Absolutely. I would be a very, very cranky little lady on that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday if my last poo was on the Saturday. So no, I mean, I strongly disagree with your GP's reassurance that 1 to 2 times per week is okay, because from a common sense point of view, it can't be. So now you all have an option. We can stay and answer questions for as long as you want, or at least I can. So you can either unmute yourself and ask a question verbally, or type it into the chat box. It's totally up to you if you want to stay anonymous. You could just type it in, but if you're happy to just unmute yourself and have a chat, that's also fine. And these, I always say on social media, you like, don't message me with personal questions, but this is the opposite. This is your opportunity to now ask personal questions. So the next question is 5.5-year-old, yeah, bad sleeper, bad eater, bad constipation. That's exactly what we see all the time. Oh, bless, been hospitalized with constipation, had an NG tube. Yes, I've had clients like that. And now months and months. Is there any hope? 100%. There is so much hope. So one of the studies that Summer just referred to, it looked at acacia gum versus Osmolax for relieving constipation. And acacia gum is in one of the products that we frequently use for constipation. And the study showed that acacia gum was just as good as the Osmolax. And it has a really beneficial effect on your gut. So why would the hospital not use something like that instead? Or even lactulose, which you can buy in the chemist for like $9. It's also a prebiotic, and it's a very beneficial way to get your child's bowel moving. So yes, there is hope. I would say make an appointment with either Summer or Kelly, and we highly, highly recommend in these situations that you do some testing straight off the bat. And that's usually going to be a stool test in this situation, because that will tell you exactly what is the problem. Is it because the motility, so the pulsing of your child's gut, is too slow? Is it because there's a real lack of beneficial bacteria? Do they have an overgrowth of the methane producing bacteria? Is there inflammation in their gut? We look at all of those things on stool tests, and then we can say, bang, 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 these are the 3 things that we need to do to fix the problem. And yes, it costs money, between sort of 450, 550, depending on what test we recommend, but that is the same price as going to see a gastroenterologist. And if you went to see a gastroenterologist in your situation, they would probably say you need to take Osmolax forever. We'll be in touch. I'm based in Sydney. So we're actually based all over the place, the 3 of us. So we work predominantly via telehealth. I have clients in Ireland, in America. I know Kelly has a lot in the UK. So it doesn't matter where you are, we offer the same service. So absolutely just jump on and make an appointment. Learned a lot today. Observed my son's speech on the day that he's constipated, as he regressed suddenly and developed a stutter. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is other reasons for a stutter, but it's certainly something to think about. So we've still got quite a few people on the line, so welcome to ask as many questions as you want. So if you do want to make an appointment, if you go to our website, so the pediatricnaturopath.com.au, and go to the practitioners page, you can see the 3 of us, and you can make an appointment. But if you need help with that, just let me know. If there's no other questions, we're just over the hour. Last chance. 5, 4, 3. No. So great question. Would you suggest stopping laxatives straight away? No. Because your child will just get constipated. And then they'll end up with a fissure or, you know, in pain. So no, that's not what we recommend at all. What we recommend is that we titrate down the laxatives as we bring in the other treatments. So one of the prebiotics that Summer mentioned is PHGG, partially hydrolyzed guar. So we will often put a child on a normal dose of the partially hydrolyzed guar, and over the course of the next month, as the poo gets softer and softer and looser, then you just very, very slowly reduce down the Osmolax. So if they're on 2 sachets of Osmolax a day, after, you know, when you see the poo starting to change, you might go down to like 1 3/4 sachet. And then as it gets looser, you go to 1 1/2 sachet. So we never, ever want to make a child constipated. And that's what will happen if you just remove the laxatives, they'll get constipated. So you need to balance it down and, you know, just carefully do it. The other thing that is not in the research, but there's plenty of anecdotal reports, is about the effect of Osmolax on your child's sort of mood and behavior. And some people notice a lot of strong side effects whenever they go on to Osmolax. And I actually finally got one of my clients off Osmolax after, you know, encouraging the mother to do it for a while. And he is a different child. It was like night and day when he stopped the Osmolax. He was so relaxed and happy to engage, where he like really never was before. So it's interesting, but not really in the research, but there's lots of anecdotal reports. Wouldn't even know who to book with. Well, I am generally not taking any new clients. So Summer works Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Kelly works Monday, Tuesday. So really, you might just want to look and see who has availability on the days that you have availability. I attest that both are excellent and will be able to help you. So yeah, just choose whatever fits in with your schedule. Yes, Colleen, I've heard a lot of children cut out foods at 18 months. Is there something developmentally that happens here? Yes. So when your child goes through a cognitive shift, their eating will regress. And that happens at certain time points. I think 12 to 18 months is one of those times where they take a cognitive leap and then their eating regresses. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's also one at like, maybe 5, 8, 9, and then also as a teenager. So when they're going through a cognitive shift, they will regress. And the majority of children will come out of that sort of unscathed, but some will never move forward again. Often the parents I'm talking to have neurodivergent children. So that applies to all children, regardless. My other question is about success in treating fussy eating in autistic children with sensory challenges. So the funny thing is that I do a 12-week program for extreme fussy eaters, and probably 85% of the children doing that have an autism diagnosis. They are the most successful. I would say the 15% that are not autistic are less successful. And my assumption is that because they have something else going on that we haven't accurately identified, therefore they do not respond. But the sensory challenges, first of all, we address that with zinc, because zinc is really important for sensory regulation, but also the feeding therapy, which I do either in person or via telehealth. It uses a process called systematic desensitization. So it very carefully and slowly reduces your child's sensitivity to other tastes, flavors, and textures. So it's perfect. It's SOS feeding therapy, stands for sensory oral something else, sequential oral sensory. So it is actually designed for sensory. Or full groups are cut out. Absolutely, all my kids have full food groups cut out. I mean, my clients that do that program, they all cut out fruit, maybe not fruit, but certainly vegetables. And I like to kind of reframe that a little bit for parents, because although we really want our kids to eat 5 vegetables and 2 fruits every day, like that's what the evidence says is optimal, there are other plant foods that are also extremely beneficial that don't have the psychological barrier that vegetables do. So some of my extreme fussy eaters, they won't eat vegetables, but I can get them eating walnuts, pepitas, sunflower seeds. And, if you rack up 10 different nuts and seeds and eat them every week, that's 10 different plant foods every week. And that's awesome. So yes, absolutely, there is still hope. There's always hope. Oh, no, I didn't see that question. Kelly, what is the best way to try and figure out a food sensitivity? What did I miss that? Oh, yeah, sorry, Ro. Well, so the best way, the gold standard way to figure out a food sensitivity is to do an elimination and reintroduction, which is a lengthy process, but one that we support clients with. We've got a complete, I think it's a 100-page ebook of recipes, meal plans, instructions of how to do this that we use with clients. So you take out the most likely offending foods for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then you bring them in one at a time. So this works really well for something like a sleep issue. It actually works really well because you would cut out the possible foods, and after 3 weeks, assuming that your child's not sleeping because of food sensitivity, they will be sleeping. And then after 3 weeks, you bring back, say, dairy. And the night that you bring back dairy, your child can't fall asleep and they wake up 5 times. You go, okay, it was the dairy. And you go on through each food. So it takes months, to cut everything out and then bring everything back one at a time. But that is the validated way to do it. The other way that we often do it is to do an IgG blood test. And you can do one that looks at 44 foods or many more, but the more foods you test, the more expensive it gets. And we still get really good results with that. And that will say, is it eggs? Is it dairy? Is it, peanuts? What is the problem? Is it safe to start zinc without testing? If your child's a fussy eater, I would, wager $50 that they're deficient in zinc. So yes, it's kind of a slam dunk to start them with zinc. You don't want to give zinc willy-nilly for like 6 months without some data, but you can certainly start them out. And we didn't talk about like body signs tonight. That might be a masterclass for another day, but having white spots on your nails, stretch marks, like impetigo that won't heal up, all of those things show that your child is zinc deficient. So you can kind of do a little bit of guesswork as well. How do you get the kids to do a stool test for testing those bacteria? You get them to poop into a takeaway container. So a lot of kids don't bat an eyelid, and there's some kids that just go, no way, I'd rather go for a blood test, thank you. But generally you just get them to poop. If they're in a nappy, it's great, you just scoop it out. But for older kids, you just say, tell me when you're going to the toilet, I need to collect that poop. Which, if your child's very constipated and they're only going once a week, is tricky, because the stool test usually has to be done on Monday or Tuesday. Did I miss any other questions? If I did, just pop them down. No. Well, thank you very much. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to Summer and Kelly for presenting so beautifully. And I will, I have recorded this and I will upload it and I will share it. So if you want to watch it again, you're more than welcome. And yes, thank you. And yeah, hopefully I'll talk to some of you soon. So thank you very much and have a great evening. That was a branch falling on my roof. Sorry. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.